Neil Hamilton.
Well, I'm always happy to debate the issues of Brexit in this chamber, but it would have been quite easy for the First Minister to come today and make a much shorter statement than the one he did. He could simply have said there have been no developments in the last few months, and that is because, I agree with him, we're no closer to a solution. That's because the Prime Minister is not asking the right question. And right at the beginning, she wants to cobble together some kind of a deal which has, in substance, kept us inside the EU, whilst nominally looking as though we've left it. And that is something which is doomed to failure, because obviously the EU are never going to accept that kind of arrangement. For them, you either have to be in or out. So we've wasted the last 2.5 years, and we can all criticise the government for the uncertainty or extra uncertainty which this has caused. And it's a highly justifiable criticism that the United Kingdom government has not made adequate preparations, or indeed any preparations, as far as we can see, that of any great substance, for leaving without a deal. That, I think, is one of the major problems that we've got to contend with. The reason this sort of language in the statement doesn't help, of course, fanatical insistence of hardline Brexiteers that no deal isn't acceptable outcome. Of course, there's fanatical insistence of hardline Remainers that we should do everything possible to undermine the referendum result. That sort of language doesn't really get us anywhere. But the reason why we have these fanatical insisters on both sides of the argument is that nobody trusts the Prime Minister. That half the argument is that they fear that she is going to take us out of the European Union without a deal, and the other half is fearful that we're actually going to be kept inside the EU. It's the deliberate, calculated obscurity of the Prime Minister in her language that has produced this outcome, and which is the most toxic element in this mix. So, to that extent, I can accept what the First Minister has said today. But continued access to 40 trade deals is not going to be vital to our future as a nation. I mean, who are these trade deals that the EU has managed in its 50-odd-year history to negotiate? San Marino, Andorra, the Bailiwick of Guernsey, the Isle of Man, the Bailiwick of Jersey, Monaco, and now we've got Serbia, Montenegro and Albania, Moldova, Georgia. Well, these are all worthy deals that could be done. But apart from Mexico, with whom the EU agreed a deal some years ago, and most recently Japan, only this year, Canada, and so on, then the EU, it'll be far easier for us than for the EU, because the EU is a protectionist conspiracy, whereas we are not. And free trade deals are actually a dart which is aimed right at the heart of the EU, as the decision of Japanese car companies recently proved, because one of the elements in Honda's decision has been that with a free trade deal with the EU, they can now have tariff-free access to the EU markets, but they don't actually need to produce inside the EU. So that's shut them all up a bit over there, hasn't it? So yes, free trade deals are an important part of Britain's future outside the EU, which is why membership of the customs union is incompatible with it. Now, from the First Minister's statement today, you would think that the whole British economy is, to use his phrase, going over a cliff. But latest ONS market data published this week show that in the last quarter of 2018, 167,000 more people have been employed. That's 440,000 more people in work in the United Kingdom in the course of the calendar year 2018. Employment rate, therefore, is the highest ever. 60,000 fewer people in zero-hours contracts. The lowest unemployment since 1974. Unemployment fell 100,000 in 2018. Wages have gone up by 3.4%, 1.3% in real terms. And yet, when the referendum result was announced, and indeed before it, the predictions were that the whole economy was going into a black pit. And the predictions of the Treasury at the time were that unemployment in Britain would be 500,000 to 800,000 higher than it was in May 2018. So much for the Treasury forecasts, which are no more than political propaganda by our arch Remainer, Chancellor of the Exchequer. So, another interesting development in the last few days is that Italy is now seeking a separate Brexit deal with Britain because they recognise the importance to them of a no-deal Brexit with the EU. Food and Drink Europe has said that the exit of the UK from the EU without a deal will constitute a lose-lose situation. And for the entire agri-food chain, the impact will be immediate and harsh. There are two sides to this argument, of course, the EU and the UK. The UK has said right at the start, and indeed Mr Tusk said right at the start that he wanted to offer a free trade deal with the UK. The Prime Minister has refused to take up that option, and the intransigence of Juncker and Barnier, on the other hand, has kept this solution away from the negotiating table. That is the way forward for Britain. There is a world outside the EU. The EU is only 15% of the world economy compared with 30% 30 years ago, and it'll be half that again in 30 years' time. The growth in the world is occurring in those parts of the world to which the car companies are now relocating, and not only from Britain, because Honda is closing its Honda Civic production line in Turkey and may actually close its entire operations there, and Turkey is inside the customs union. Donald Trump is talking about imposing a 25% tariff on EU exporters of cars to the United States, because we insist on having a 10% tariff against American cars, whereas they have only a 2.5% tariff in return. The German car industry will certainly feel the wind of change if that happens, and as Britain buys 1 in 7 of every vehicle that is made in Germany, then a no-deal Brexit will also be a severe difficulty for them, as the German economy has now been in recession for 2 quarters, something which they've not experienced for a great many years. Whereas Britain remains open for business to the growth industries of the future. A £400 million tech fund established this week in London by the Abu Dhabi state investor Mutadala Investment Company and SoftBank, because the UK is the global capital of technical innovation. These are the industries of the future that we should be concentrating on. These are the opportunities which open up to us after Brexit. I don't want a no-deal Brexit. I want to have a free trade arrangement with the European Union. I always have had. But the failure to talk Turkey about these issues is now something which is going to be a big problem for us. The other big problem for the car industry, of course, is diesel. And it's the EU's and the United Kingdom and Welsh Government's policy on emissions, which is one of the biggest problems for the European car manufacturers. That's one of the major reasons behind Nissan's reason for abandoning production in Sunderland, because nobody is going to want diesel cars in a very short time, and yet these are the current production lines. So I do wish that the First Minister would be more balanced in his statements. Yes, there are going to be problems of transition from leaving the EU, even more so with a no deal, the fault for which I believe lies first and foremost in 10 Downing Street. But there are opportunities there as well, and continually talking down the British economy is not the way forward, and certainly not the way forward if you have an interest in the well-being of the Welsh people.